Okay, so close your eyes for a second. Picture that classic spiritual guide figure. You can almost hear the drum beat, right?
Mm.
Really intense. You see the costume, all the symbols, and then that collapse. The trance. We have a name for that figure. The shaman.
Yeah, it's a really powerful image, exotic even.
Mhm.
But that image, it's something Western culture kind of constructed, isn't it?
Mhm.
So today our mission really is to cut through some of that confusion around the word shaman.
Mhm.
We need to ask, how accurate is that picture, especially when you look at where the word actually started?
Exactly. And that's the deep dive today. We're looking at sources, mostly an academic critique, that really challenge how the West academia first, then the whole New Age market, kind of lifted this term, took it completely out of context, and, well, redefined it. It's like tracking a word that traveled thousands of miles and sort of lost its passport along the way.
Good way to put it. And to do that properly, we absolutely have to start at the beginning.
Mm.
Set the ethnographic benchmark, that word saman. It's not some universal term floating around. It's very specific. Comes directly from the Tungus language, Central Siberia. And it just means one who knows.
The knowledge keeper. Simple as that.
Pretty much.
Okay.
And this whole circumboreal area, Siberia, the far north of Eurasia, even into North America, that's the documented standard.
Yeah.
That's what we should measure everything else against. If someone doesn't fit that Siberian model, we really need to question why we're slapping the shaman label on them.
Okay, great. So let's unpack that baseline. Who were these original Siberian shamans? What did they actually do?
Well, the Siberian shaman, and it could be a man or a woman, was fundamentally a religious leader for their community. Their work, using those handheld drums, working with spirit allies.
Yeah.
It wasn't about personal growth or finding yourself. It was practical. It was community service.
Like what kind of service?
Things like healing the sick, divining the future,
Mm-hmm.
what steps the community needed to take, guiding offerings, all crucial for survival.
And the performance aspect, the ritual itself, sounds like it was just incredible. Our sources talk about these amazing details from early researchers, the Jochelsons, around 1900 with the Koryak people. You have to imagine being inside this dark, enclosed space, watching this young shaman start his ritual.
Oh, the descriptions are fantastic. It reads like stage directions. This young guy, he was apparently a master ventriloquist. So as he starts singing, beating his drum, imitating spirits like the wolf, the loon, the sound wasn't just coming from him. It would seem to move all around the space, up near the ceiling, behind you, down in the fire pit.
Wow, so for the people watching, that wasn't just performance, it was like proof.
Absolutely. Irrefutable, physical proof that the spirits were right there in the room with them, active.
That sounds almost like, I don't know, stage magic, but deeply spiritual. It's about convincing the community that this spirit world is real and potent.
And it didn't stop with sounds. The sources say he did this incredible visual illusion. He claimed the spirits needed a sacrifice, right? Took Jochelson's own sharp finish knife, made some rattling sounds, and then bam, plunged it right up to the hilt into his own chest.
A self-stabbing illusion. Seriously.
That's what was reported. And when they brought the lights back up, he was totally exhausted, just tiny spots of blood showing through a little hole in his jacket. The onlookers believed the wound healed instantly. It just shows how central performance and, frankly, skillful illusion were to their role. They had to make the spiritual tangible.
We also hear about another example, the Yukagir shaman, Nelbosh. His performance sounds like the classic soul journey.
Yes, that's a perfect illustration of the journey concept in its original context. Nelbosh would collapse, just lie motionless on a reindeer skin. This meant his soul had left his body. It traveled, using the drum as a kind of portal, conceptualized as a lake to the kingdom of shadows, the underworld.
Why? What was the purpose?
To forcibly bring back the soul of someone who was sick. That was the belief. And when his soul supposedly returned, he'd be physically wiped out, sometimes even temporarily paralyzed, needing others to massage his legs back to life.
It's fascinating. So if we pull back from these stories, what are the core sort of observable things that defined these original circumboreal shamans?
Okay, based on the ethnography, you've got 1, the single-headed hide drum, usually held near the head. 2, the costume, often elaborate, with pendants, geometric shapes, animals, human forms. 3, the ritual itself, drumming, chanting, or singing, often imitating animal voices and dancing. And 4, that final collapse or period of really intense inward focus, what observers usually just call trance.
That specificity feels really important. Okay, so if that's the specific Siberian reality, How on earth did this term get, taken out and applied universally by European thinkers?
Well, that's where it gets complicated. It really starts entering European intellectual circles in the 18th century, and it
Mhm.
feeds right into this long-standing Western idea of primitivism.
Ah, the noble savage idea.
Exactly. The notion that these distant, supposedly simpler cultures somehow preserved a pure, ancient religion that civilized Europe had lost.
And who was the key figure in really cementing that universal idea?
That would undoubtedly be Mircea Eliade. His book from 1951, Shamanism, Archaic Techniques of Ecstasy, was hugely influential, became the text for generations of scholars.
But Iliade, he wasn't exactly out there in Siberia doing field work, was he?
Not at all. He's often described as the quintessential armchair scholar, apparently quite desperate for an academic job, and he found success by compiling vast amounts of secondhand accounts, travelers' tales, missionary reports, often accepted pretty uncritically, sources that weren't always reliable.
So no dirty field work for him.
None. And his big conclusion from all this reading, it was, well, problematic. He claimed that shamanism, in quotes, is timeless, universal, and its defining feature, the single defining feature, is ecstasy, which he defined as being beside oneself.
What's the critique of that? It sounds quite grand, a universal spiritual technique.
The major critique is that his work wasn't really based on objective analysis, but on a kind of mystical presupposition. He wanted to find this universal archaic core. And by doing so, he essentially put non-Western religions outside of history, in a time warp.
Locking them into this role of just being ancient relics.
Precisely. Denying them their own dynamic histories, their own changes and developments. By calling these archaic techniques, he fed into that harmful myth of non-Western peoples being people without history. And that's the baggage the term shaman carries when it's used loosely today.
Which means we really need to be specific. Just throwing the word shaman around creates confusion, not clarity. Because if you actually compare that Siberian benchmark to other spiritual practitioners around the world who get called shamans, the differences often jump out more than the similarities.
Absolutely. Let's take South America, for instance.
Right.
They have really powerful figures like the Huichol Maracame in Mexico or the Tucanoan adepts in the Amazon, often labeled shamans. But look at their methods. Are they using the Siberian drum? Are they doing that specific soul journey Nelbosch did?
Probably not, right? What do they do?
Well, the Huichol Maracame uses things like a musical bow, gourds. And crucially, peyote is central to their practice. And the Tucanoan adepts, they rely heavily on other powerful hallucinogens, sometimes leading to a state of stupor. It's not the drumming-induced trance journey of Siberia.
So different tools, different substances, different states of consciousness, really.
Exactly. The methods are fundamentally different.
Okay, so if the drum and that specific journey aren't universal, what about the things that do seem similar sometimes, like rhythmic sound, dancing, intense concentration? Is that proof of some ancient shared religion?
Our sources suggest maybe we're looking for connections that aren't necessarily there, or at least not in the way Eliade thought. Hypothesis 4, as it's put, points to something maybe simpler. Basic human physiology. Our genes.
How so?
Well, humans are just wired to respond to rhythm, to chanting, to vocalization. That seems universal. And intense mental concentration, that's a skill, a learnable skill that you see across cultures, across history, the ability to focus so intensely you might seem to dissociate.
And we see that same kind of intense focus in Western traditions too, don't we? But we never dream of calling them shamans.
Never. Think about Christian mystics, like St. Teresa of Avila. Her writings describe intense prayer leading to physical effects, like dissociation, feeling her hands go stiff as wood. That's profound spiritual concentration. But is anyone calling her a shaman? Of course not.
That's more individual, though. What about group rituals or things tied to power?
Good point. Consider the old ritual of the king's touch, practiced for centuries by English and French monarchs. The belief was that the king, endowed with heavenly power, could cure diseases like scrofula just by touching people.
So a kind of faith healing tied to royal authority.
Right, based on concentrated belief in spiritual power vested in a person. But again, we reserve that specific, often exoticized label shaman almost exclusively for non-Western figures, the other.
Which leads us right into the modern day, doesn't it? The contemporary market, neo-shamanism. And the biggest shift seems to be the focus. Siberian shamans serve the community. Neo-shamanism seems all about the self.
That's a key distinction. It really reflects modern, Western, possessive individualism, as scholars call it. The priority is individual self-fulfillment, personal growth, finding your own path, almost the opposite of the original Siberian model.
And who's the big name associated with popularizing, even commercializing this modern version?
That would be Michael Harner.
Hmm.
He was incredibly influential in packaging and selling these ideas. His claim was that he could strip away all the cultural baggage, his words, to find a core shamanism, something universal that anyone, regardless of background, could learn and practice.
How did he propose people access this core? Did it involve the same intense rituals or substances?
Not usually. He famously substituted rhythmic drumming, often just listening to recordings for hallucinogens. This, he claimed, could induce what he called the shamanic state of consciousness, or SSC.
SSC. Okay. And what happens in this state?
In the SSC, Harner said, you could perceive non-ordinary reality, or NOR. And in this NOR, you supposedly encounter spirit guides, power animals, wise teachers. And significantly, he framed these not just as beliefs or metaphors, but as empirically real beings you could interact with.
Wow. So it's marketed almost like discovering a hidden dimension that's objectively real.
Exactly. Not just a belief system, but an experiential reality waiting to be accessed. And it quickly became a business. Harner's Foundation for Shamanic Studies sold cassette tapes of drumming, ran expensive workshops. There was even an attempt by one of his followers to get shamanic healing services covered by a local health maintenance organization, an HMO.
Slight chuckle, shamanic healing on the HMO plan. That really says something about the blending of ancient ideas with modern consumer culture. It sounds like, a kind of spiritual Disney World where you pay to find your spirit animal and maybe work through some personal issues.
That commercialization definitely strips away a lot of the original context and, frankly, the danger and complexity. And a major issue with this whole neo-shamanic movement is the homogenization. It mashes everything together.
How do you mean?
Well, you might get workshops blending supposed Celtic wisdom, bits of Hinduism, maybe some Carlos Castaneda stuff, all mixed into this accessible, often quite benign spiritual smoothie. A Disney world of benign power animals, as one critic put it.
And that ignores the fact that in many traditional cultures, the spirit world wasn't necessarily seen as friendly or easy to deal with, right?
Not at all. That's a crucial point. Traditional practices were often seen as difficult, even dangerous. Take the Inuit Agakakut, for example. Reports suggest they often had intense struggles to control the powerful spirits they worked with. The spirit world wasn't always a comforting self-help seminar. The stakes felt very real, very high.
So circling back to the big picture, the anthropological take, that label, shaman, it seems to carry this historical weight, this baggage connected to primitivism.
Deeply rooted baggage. This stereotype that non-Western, non-literate societies are somehow simple or rude, and because of that, they preserve these ancient truths that civilization has lost. It's a condescending view.
And there's that critique about the deafening silence, right?
Yes, from anthropologist Yolanda Moses, a very powerful point. When shaman is routinely applied to non-Western practitioners, Hushol, Dene, Yukagir, whoever, but never to Western figures who might use similar techniques, like faith healers or mystics, what does that silence tell us? It tells us that the term is being used to reinforce the other, to imply that only non-Western people have this kind of archaic spirituality. It carries a racist undertone.
And this isn't just academic quibbling. There are real-world political consequences.
Absolutely. First Nations leaders themselves have protested this kind of cultural appropriation and commercialization. They argue very strongly that it takes the public eye away from the real issues that natives face today. Issues like sovereignty, social justice, economic challenges. The focus on romanticized spirituality becomes a distraction.
So the bottom line for careful thinking, for good scholarship, is what? Use the term cautiously.
At the very least, recognize the serious limits of Eliade's universal definition. Be specific. Using shaman outside that original Siberian or circumboreal context is often reductionist. It flattens the incredible diversity and complexity of different spiritual traditions worldwide. Whether you're talking about a Maya Ashkun or a European medieval mystic, they deserve their own terms, their own context.
Wow. We've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive, from that incredibly specific Siberian ventriloquist shaman through Eliade's armchair theories that kind of froze cultures in time, all the way to today's commercialized quest for non-ordinary reality sold in workshops.
It's quite a journey, for one word, and it shows how ideas get transformed, sometimes distorted, as they move across cultures and time. The most sophisticated spiritual approaches, maybe the most sustainable ones, are often invisible to the outside eye precisely because they're so deeply embedded in a community. But there's a final thought here, something provocative maybe.
Okay, leave us with something to chew on.
Well, think about that core difference we discussed. The hyper-individualistic quest for self-fulfillment, that seems to drive so much of neo-shamanism. That feels like a distinctly modern Western preoccupation, doesn't it?
Yeah, finding yourself, your personal power.
Exactly. So the question becomes, why do we in the modern West feel the need to pay strangers for a journey to find ourselves? When the original shaman, the Samim, existed almost entirely to reinforce the community, its cohesion, its survival,
Hmm?
maybe the comparison suggests something deeper. Perhaps it's not a lack of personal power animals were suffering from. Perhaps the real modern affliction we're trying, maybe clumsily, to cure is a lack of genuine communal spirit, something to think about.